All right, my next guest here on Arts Talk with LVA is Ceirra Evans, a Louisville-based painter depicting Appalachia and the working class Southern narrative. Ceirra's work has been reviewed by Hyperallergic, The New Yorker, and other publications. Her work is exhibited in 21C in Louisville and is held in multiple private collections. Ceirra was born and raised in Eastern Kentucky. Evans's body of work depicts scenes directly from her early life in the foothills of the Appalachian region. Her work depicts stories of generational poverty, trauma, rural queerness, and familial relationships. Ceirra's work uses humor and illustration to sift through the discourse critiquing the region. And the reason I've invited her at this particular moment in time, your second appearance on the show, is that she is being recognized at the 2023 LVA Honors as the Emerging Artist of the Year. That is on March 22nd. If you care to join us and buy a ticket, it is a fundraiser. Go to louisvilleart.org. You can find out more about doing that. We're here now to talk to Ceirra. So Ceirra, you are being recognized as the emerging artist. And one of the things, just to reveal a little bit of the inside baseball, is that as we develop this and talk about it each year, it's kind of like, what is an emerging artist? So, like, do you consider yourself an emerging artist? I mean, you're young enough. You've done some good stuff. You have many great years ahead of you. Is that an emerging artist? Are you an emerging artist?
Well, I think I'm definitely an emerging artist, but I'm an emerging artist that got super lucky. I feel like, and I think, there's a lot of, whenever we think of the word emerging, I think a lot of artists, get very emotional and think that it degrades their work. But I find that it's probably one of the best spots to be at, which is where you have a lot more opportunities to mess up and become the artist that you really want to be. The artist that I am right now, I know will change in many years to come. So
I always think about, like, ideally for myself, and I'm not the only sort of voice in the room or perspective in the room, but I always think like it's somebody who's just recently in the last year or so, whose profile has really risen from exhibiting. It's so I always feel like that's a big part of it. Like, you're exhibiting, you're being seen as an artist. I think that's what an emerging artist needs to be. You're also, the in your bio, the phrase in rural queerness, and rural is such a hard word to say.
I know.
It also makes me, it's interesting because I feel like, I think a lot of stereotypes about queerness somehow gets tied to urban environments, cities, those kinds of communities. Because I can also think of there's a drag performer in town who did a whole piece about growing up, and it was in the guise of the drag, the character, but it was also that individual's personal story. And their phrase was country queer, that they had in rural Indiana. And that it was this kind of, and it's an interesting designation, I think. Does Appalachia, does that Appalachian background define your queer identity in differently than somebody who grew up in a whole nother place? Obviously it does in the sense of your work, I guess, but like, talk a little bit about that aspect of your identity and what's coming into your work.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do think that they're, whether you say it's country queerness or it's rural queerness, I think a lot of us that are putting our queerness in, whether that's in performance or that's a visual, we're putting it out there for people to look at and be a part of. And I'm the kind of person that also thinks that once you make something and you put it out to the public, it's never yours again. It's for everybody else to, make up whatever they like to think about it and put their own twist on it. But I think with, I kind of talked about this last time we were talking, with growing up queer in Appalachia and growing up queer in a rural space, I've found that it is completely, I feel like I'm a different queer person, and it's not to say I'm a better or worse or whatever that might be, but I just think that how I was raised to love and how I was raised to understand queerness was much quieter. And I find that is what I've been looking at in my work, is that my queerness, I felt, was it was only explored and expressed in very quiet spaces. And I felt like it's different for folks that maybe grew up queer and open and in a metropolitan area, where they're able to, I think being queer is a little bit more accepted, and you're allowed to explore that in wider locations. And yeah, I think that, within the new work, it's quieter. It's understanding that, whenever loving somebody, or my experience of loving somebody growing up, was never seen by anybody. It was only experienced by me and the other person there. And I think that is really fun for me as a painter, to be able to try to explore that and reimagine that. But I think it does influence who I am as I've moved to Louisville, and I've moved to a city as well.
Well, it's an interesting, because you mentioned this before we started recording, that you felt like your work had been maybe louder, and that your current work, which I haven't necessarily seen, the stuff that's happening in your studio right now, it's quieter. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, because I'm not all of your stuff, but a lot of your stuff, I think the larger work, the stuff that really connected to me, was very narrative driven. That they were, it seemed about the life of a community, and there were characters that were based on real people, or they were based on you and family members. So when you talk about this sort of change in the volume of your work, how does that affect the nature of your paintings?
Definitely. I think just to be honest, I don't live in Eastern Kentucky anymore. That is a truth that I have to be very, very real about. But it is still something that I am, understanding. I'm coming to terms with how I love Kentucky, and especially Eastern Kentucky, and really trying to find a lot of what I love about Eastern Kentucky in a big city, or a big city to me, at least, like Louisville. And I think that is what has changed the most in the work, is that beforehand, the work was me really putting down memories, and putting down this very almost naive sense of trying to understand what was going on in my early life. And now I try to face the facts of, I'm removed from that more than I am inside it. And I think that is what changed the volume of the work itself, is that being removed from that, but also having that part of me still very, very strong, but living with that in a city. I think in some of the newer works that I'm working on, it's kind of really almost about like how the city's putting a hurting on you, and how, like, you find there's that sort of urban solitude that I think that comes with this past year, especially. I think there's been a lot of different things happening in my personal life, and I'm sure that everybody would feel connected to it. But there's been a lot of times that I've had to really sit down and reflect on how the city has changed me, even, but with that identity of Appalachia still very at the core.
Was it a difficult transition, or just a transition?
Well, I think with moving here, I moved here to go to Spalding University, and it was Louisville. I'd only been to Louisville maybe 3 or 4 times, and I'd only seen 4th Street Live, and that's all I thought that Louisville was 4th Street Live, which is not true. That does not represent Louisville at all. But I think once I got to Louisville, I think that's whenever really the journey of me understanding this connection with Eastern Kentucky came about. And I think it's one of the paradigms of, once you're removed from something, you're able to finally put a frame around it, and finally find a perspective, and maybe even a stronger connection, which is such a weird thing, to be removed from something and find more love for that thing. But it's I don't think it's been it hasn't been a tough transition. It's more so a tough transition, and understanding who you are in the space of people around you, who you are whenever you're in a group of people around you, and what makes you, I guess, different in a way. Whenever you're in college, I feel like that's all you're thinking about. That's what I was thinking about in college, was like, how am I connecting with this person? Am I connecting with them on a real level? And I think that may have been the hardest connection. But here in the past year, I found that I am connecting more with folks that are people from Eastern Kentucky, people from rural areas. And those are the people that I keep closest with me and closest to my heart. And that's what's made, I feel like, my home here in Louisville feel actually like capital H home, is that finding those people and realizing that there's not one way to go about being removed from home, and also being an artist within a city and being an emerging artist especially.
Are those people from Eastern Kentucky, are they artists or creatives, or did you meet them because they're from Eastern Kentucky? Like what is your community now that you've emerged into as an artist in Louisville?
Well, I think a lot of my community came from whenever I was working at the Speed Art Museum, which was, I think, one of the bigger jobs that I've had since I've lived in Louisville. And that was, really, I took that job because I was like, I'm gonna, this is my step into the art world. This is how I'm gonna see the art world.
Sure.
And from that, you start to see the politics of the art world. You start to see how really like an institution starts to work. But I think from that, I've gained so many connections, and luckily I've just been able to be surrounded by those folks that have worked there, and then maybe have not, then have been removed from there. And somehow I've found a connection with those people. And then from that, I think that in a godly way, in a weird sense, that more and more people I'm finding that are from Eastern Kentucky, or folks that are even were in my past, are now in Louisville. And it's made it's truly helped me a lot in the times whenever I feel like there is like this sort of urban solitude that your early 20s likes to give you.
Well, you've shown Susan Mormon Gallery. It's sort of been a champion of yours, and I think you've shown there twice now.
I've shown there 3 times.
Three times. How did that connection and relationship happen?
Sorry, go ahead.
That's through the Speed?
No, so actually that was in my first year of college. I'm too big for my britches whenever it comes to something that I want to understand, or whenever I'm trying to master something. And one of the things that I was really trying to wrap my head around was the idea of an arts community within a city like Louisville, any idea of an arts community. And I had an old professor of mine at Spalding give me a pamphlet of I think it's one of the LVA pamphlets, if I'm not mistaken, that
gallery guide kind of thing, or something?
Yeah, the gallery guides. Yeah, one of the gallery guides. And I was like, I told this professor, I just want to work for a gallery, or I just want to see if somebody will sit down and answer questions about what I have about arts communities and how galleries work, and the relationships that they have with artists. And he gave me the pamphlet, and he just said, message all of these galleries, maybe one of them will get back to you. If they don't, they don't. And I messaged almost every single gallery, every single person that I could find. Any way I could sneakily find an email if I couldn't find one. And the only person that really got back to me and gave me like the time out of their day was Susan Mormon. And I sat in her gallery and I asked her a bunch of wild random questions that probably seem pretty normal to some other people that have been raised in an artist community, but and she just sat there and just gave me the truth about this sort of stuff, and let me sit in the gallery for way too long and take up too much of her time. And then that relationship, afterwards kind of drifted apart. And then as I was making artwork in college, it came back, and Susan messaged me and was like, you're really working on something here. Maybe we should show your artwork. Let's see if your artwork's ready for the gallery space. Let's see if your artwork's ready for, a big crowd of people in Louisville to come see it. And luckily enough, I think we, divine timing, it worked out.
Well, of course, it's interesting because you're talking, I mean, she was the only one, and I say shame on other galleries because that's exactly what a gallerist should be doing. I mean, getting to know an artist, building that relationship, that's how you're able to represent the artist in the fullest way, is not just say, well, I like your paintings, bring them in, I'll try to sell them. Take that time, you sit down, you get to know the artist. And so good for her. That's exactly what somebody running a gallery should be doing.
Yeah, definitely 100%. And I think that's, that's been such an amazing, great relationship, is just being able to have somebody, really sit down and obviously introduce me to, the great community that we have here in Louisville, and other artists. That's been the greatest thing too, is being introduced to the other artists that Susan represents. Because without them, I don't think that I would be the artist that I am today, because they're able to field all the questions that I have about, how do you use the nasty word network, and talk about your work in a professional sense.
Well, are there artists and that you would count as influences when you talk about that? Like who is it that's maybe having the most profound influence on you in this new community of yours?
Well, I think once, being in Louisville, I think one of the artists that I really looked at was John Brooks. And I mean, looking at how, before, whenever he had Quappy, and knowing that he was a working artist, but also a working artist that was also helping other artists, I just thought that was so, to me, I just thought that was lovely and amazing. And, knew that he actually cared for the artists, was something that really touched me. And I think, I've had some talks with John before, and it's John. I think one of the best pieces of advice that John gave me was just, it takes time, and you talk to other artists, and at some point you'll realize that you're in the thick of it, and you'll be an artist amongst other artists, and somehow you'll feel you'll feel like you're a part of something. And I think that's what a lot of artists, but I think, to switch back to like what we were talking about with emerging artists, I think that's one of the main things that that I think switches from just being a young artist to an emerging, is somebody finally calls you an artist. Somebody finally calls you, like, they finally recognize that the work that you're doing is work, and that it's not just practice that you've been doing in college, or it's not just something that you do as a hobby or a craft or something. They look at it as a story, and they're looking at it as a story that's important. And I think that's where, now I feel like that's what people know me for. And I think I'm so insanely blessed and grateful that I get to be a part of that community here in Louisville.
Have you been able to connect with any opportunities outside of Louisville? And I think I say that because, like John's kind of, he's kind of blowing up a little bit in New York and LA. And, when you talk about it takes time, John's, I don't know, he would probably not call himself a young artist,
No.
but he has been at it long enough that he's an illustration of that point, I think, right? That it's happening in that way. So have you been looking outside of Louisville to see how, or does Susan help you do that? I mean, is that something you're looking at?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think since the New Yorker article came out, I sent that to all the people that I felt like probably would want to read this and know that they helped me along the way. And one of those people was a professor, I think her name is Emily Satterwhite, if I'm not mistaken, at Virginia Tech. And she was somebody that I reached out to send me some material to talk about the history of Appalachia, the history of the history of how the hillbilly is represented. And I reached out to her for resources before that show, and once I got back to her about that, I was like, thank you so much for actually giving me resources. Here's this beautiful piece, this beautiful review that Mr. Garth Greenwell wrote about me, and I would love for you to read this, and almost as a thank you. And that actually was a connection that got me, in the future I will be showing at Virginia Tech and actually teaching a couple classes to talk about to talk into her class that talks about Appalachia, and also their arts classes over there, which is amazing to think that I didn't think that connection would become of anything, but it luckily is something I get to look forward to this year.
That's exciting. That's great. Yeah, you're doing that. Somehow I get this impression, Ceirra, that I should interview while I can, because you're going to become a big shot. And
Goodness, I hope so. I hope so. The little 14-year-old Ceirra inside of me is like, just keep doing it. Just keep, just keep going until somebody says something like that.
Well, that's good. Don't ever be complacent. No, absolutely not. You got to work. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it could happen, and it's exciting but really, so what you've done is what everything we've talked about defines you as, in some ways, the perfect example of an emerging artist, like catching you at that certain kind of point
Mhm.
in an upswing,
Mhm.
because in a year we might not be able to call you an emerging artist anymore, except artists are always continuing to emerge and grow. That's the problem with the phrase, that a lot of people see like that's a real limitation on the phrase. But yeah. So when's your next exhibit here in town? Do you have a time frame that we know we can say look for it?
Yeah, I have some new work that'll be up in May. I'm gonna say early May, somewhere around May 12th at Mormon Gallery. It's gonna be another show that I think I'll be showing with Gayla Irwin, and then I think a couple other artists, but some new works that I've been working on that really are, like I said, they're a little bit quieter, but I think that this new work is still, I think even more so talking about the outskirts and like this outlaw idea that I have, this outlaw aesthetic that I grew up with, growing up in Eastern Kentucky, and the sort of, these tattooed people and these people that suffer from addiction and suffer from many other things, and a lot of these people that I looked up to growing up, and sadly I feel like in the past year there's been some of those things that I feel like I've experienced myself, or I've got to see with my own eyes in my adult life, and that's so much different than seeing it from when you were a child. And so I think a lot of that is the relationship between those two things, and hopefully I do it well within the new show.
Great. Well, we're about out of time. Thank you so much for talking today. It's great. People ask me sometimes when I interview people, like, do you have questions and all this kind of stuff? No, I want to talk to people and I want to find out. I want discovery about what's going on with them.
Right.
And this is why you're a great interview. So thank you so much for taking the time today. Ceirra Evans, Louisville-based painter, and emerging into the world. Will be the 2023 LVA Honors Emerging Artist of the Year. That event takes place March 22nd at Louisville Visual Art, which I should just emphasize, we're excited about that, because it's in our building. And I'm trying to stop something from going off here. That is going to be in our building for the first time, and we've had some renovation work, and so we're very excited to be doing it that way. And so you'll be the first person to get that award in our building. Yeah.
I'm super excited. I'm so excited for that event that night. I just a little, I don't know why I want to say this, but I think it's important. My mother is coming to that event. My mother usually comes to these events, so I'm super excited to have her there.
Well, that's good. I'm glad she should come. I'll be happy to meet her. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ceirra.
Thank you. Appreciate y'all.